I didn't know they were going to evict me. I found out when I saw my own son arrive with a locksmith. Yes, a locksmith. With his little toolbox, a belt full of keys, and the face of, "I just follow orders." It was 11 in the morning on a sunny Tuesday, and I still had my slippers on and warm coffee in my hand. My son came wearing that fake smile he puts on when he's hiding something. I've known him since he weighed 7.5 pounds. When he smiles without showing his teeth, something smells like betrayal. "What's going on, Julian?" I said from the doorway, without opening it all the way, because a mother might be old, but she's not an idiot. "Nothing, Ma. We're here to sort out a few paperwork things," he answered, as if he'd come to change a light bulb. Behind him, my daughter-in-law, with her expensive perfume and that look that sweeps over everything as if the house were a ruin that needed to be demolished. And the locksmith, staring at the floor, poor man, not knowing where to put himself. That's when I saw the envelope, yellow, with a letterhead, "Court Notice." And I understood. They were here to throw me out of my own house. I stood still, a silence so thick you could hear the ticking of the dining room clock. The same clock my husband hung the day we bought this house 48 years ago. The clock, the table, the photos, the smell of noodle soup, everything was mine. Until that Tuesday, suddenly, it wasn't. "Don't get like that, Ma. It's just a formality," he said, with that adult voice he uses when he wants to treat me like a crazy old woman. "A formality?" I answered. "Changing my lock is a formality too?" My daughter-in-law cut in, with her superior moral tone. "Ma'am, it's nothing personal. It's just that things need to be put in order." "Oh, of course. And where do you start? By throwing out the mother or by cleaning your conscience?" They glanced at each other. The locksmith cleared his throat. And I, who never cry, felt my eyes fill. But I wasn't going to gift them a single tear. So I swallowed, breathed deep, and with the same calm with which I pour tea, I said, "You'll have to wait until I'm dead to touch that lock, and I don't plan on dying today." I closed the door slowly. No yelling, no scene, just a click. That click that separates cowards from the living. Then I leaned my back against the wood, and I felt my heart pounding in my throat. I thought of my husband, of how I trusted the papers he and my son handled, of all the times I signed without reading, just out of affection, just because family doesn't betray you. And then I laughed. Yes, I laughed to myself, angry and sad, because I realized love has fine print, and sometimes the most dangerous signature is the one you make with your heart. That Tuesday, in slippers, I started my war. A quiet, domestic war, with no weapons or allies, but mine. Now, before I go on, because what comes next is tough, and you won't believe it, I'm very curious to know from where in the world and at what time you're joining this story today. I'd love to read you in the comments, truly. Sometimes I think that if we told our lives in front of a camera, we'd be less afraid of growing old. Because that Tuesday wasn't just the day my son tried to kick me out. It was the day I discovered I still had a voice, and that I'm never going to shut up again. When I closed the door gently and stayed with my back against the wood, my heart was pounding in my chest as if someone inside me wanted to step out and take the blow for me, and I stayed like that a long while, counting my breaths, the way that physiotherapists taught me when your father was short of air. And I still believed everything could be fixed with patience and a pot on the stove. And then, I don't know why, the smell of mate from 3 winters ago came to me, the steam hitting my face while Julian, with that obedient son voice that knows where to drive the knife, brought me a folded little paper and said, "Don't you worry, Ma, I'll coordinate with the accountant. This is so they don't bug you with taxes and things, you know how it is." And I nodded. Because at that time, I was a recent widow with my eyes glued to photo frames as if people could step out of them if you never stopped looking. And because the house smelled like warmed croissants and promises always smell sweet when your own son serves them on the good tray. I see myself sitting at the head of the table, coat still on even though we were inside, because since your father died, the cold follows me everywhere, and he, all neat, and nudged over the plate with the most golden croissant, the one I'd pick without thinking, and beside it the black ink pen, serious, of a grown man who does paperwork. And I thought, what a man my son is. Look how he takes care of things. How lucky I was to raise one like that, who won't leave me alone even to sign at the pharmacy. And I remember the sun coming in sideways through the dining room window and putting a little shine on the paper. And I read a bit. I swear I did. I read, but the letters danced like rushed ants, and he laid his hand on my shoulder with a steadying caress, and said, "It's a technical thing, Ma. Succession, so the house is tidier. Then we do the bare ownership part. Usufruct, all those little words that dizzy you. Look, I'll translate. You go on living here. No one's taking you out, ever. The notary friend from the neighborhood will sign it." And then he named that lawyer we all know who smells of expensive cologne. And I relaxed, because when they say never with that manly certainty, a woman raised on bread, church, and obedience still believes, and you lean your whole body on a word as if it were a sturdy piece of furniture. Now, I mix together the crinkle of the paper under my hand and your father's laughter in my head, because he never trusted things that seemed too easy and always said, "The devils live in the fine print, girl." And I'd get offended at the tone, poor fool that I was. And I'd say, "Don't treat me like I don't understand." And I'd make the gesture to grab my glasses, but that day I couldn't find the reading ones, and Julian, without waiting, handed me his, which sat odd on me, and everything looked enlarged and distorted, and I, in that little theater of our kitchen, chose to believe the version that wouldn't crush me, because one doesn't choose the truth. You wrap it in gift paper so it hurts less. And there, with the croissant in my mouth, I signed, and I put into that stroke a firmness I don't have for more important things, and I laughed and said, "Look how nice my last name still comes out. I should practice so I don't forget it." And he kissed my forehead and repeated, "Never, Ma. We will never take you out of your house." There was wind outside that afternoon, and I was distracted by the sound of the leaves against the eaves. And he put the paper away in a blue plastic folder, neat, with dividers, as if life were an office and he had it all under control. And I poured him another mate and told him silly things: the lemon tree doesn't give fruit, the neighbor complained about the dog, and I saw myself from the outside, like the women on the news who tell how they got their wages swindled with a con. And I didn't mind the likeness. I clung to the feeling of family, of a good man taking charge, of a son who shows up, and now I wonder if he already knew that day that he wasn't protecting anything, but arranging the board for this Tuesday with a locksmith on the sidewalk, and a shiver runs from my heels to my nape because the kitchen light was warm and the sounds were the usual, and yet I was signing the landscape of my own expulsion. I remember a tiny detail that meant nothing then and now drills into me. When I finished signing, he made a small mouth twitch, like the one he made as a kid when he'd steal a piece of chocolate from the fridge, and it stuck to his palate. A poorly hidden look of satisfaction, and I saw it, and didn't know how to translate it, and preferred to sweep it from my mind the way you sweep a crumb under the tablecloth. And I kept talking, and he stayed pleasant, and now and then he'd drop a phrase in expert tone. "We have to protect the asset. The express succession, Ma. Otherwise the state eats you alive." Those big words that flatten women of my generation because they taught us to wield the sponge, not to argue percentages. And I nodded, and inside there was a little voice, a buzzing gnat saying, "Don't hand over anything you don't understand." But I saw him breathing steady, the collar ironed, and thought maybe the problem was me, that I was old and distrustful, that I'd turned to stone since your father was gone. And I signed again, because there were 2 copies, there are always 2, as if one weren't enough to seal the misfortune. That afternoon, when he left, I cleared the table, washed the cups, slid the tray back into the sideboard, and stayed a while gripping the edges of the tablecloth, as if my fingers knew before my head that important things were coming loose. And I opened the window so air would come in and the house would breathe for me. And I told myself, "Don't be dramatic, woman, trust." And I resolved not to think, not to give my fears substance. And for a while it worked, because routine is a cheap sedative, and time passed Sunday Mass, retirees' club on Wednesdays. the pharmacy on Thursdays, and every so often Julian with his folders and financial language, and me with my stubborn pot on the flame, and that's how we lived. A silent telenovela in which I was the supporting actress in my own life. If you ask me why I didn't ask to read at ease, why I didn't call for a second opinion, why I didn't consult my sister-in-law who's always been skeptical about money, I'll tell you the truth, the one that doesn't sound good on camera because it leaves you naked. I was tired, and I was sad, and I was sick of being responsible for everything like I'd been for 40 years. And when someone offers to make a decision for you and even does it with a caress on your shoulder, sometimes you accept because dignity also gets tiring, and because you're a mother and you want to believe blood doesn't fail, even though you know, somewhere dark inside, that blood is sometimes the first knife. The next day after the signature, that lawyer who smells of cologne came, the one whose scent covers sins, and he sat in my dining room as if he were in his office. And with a gold pen, he marked with a sticker where each remaining signature went, and explained in a language that seemed Spanish but wasn't, that the property is optimized, you keep the usufruct, ma'am, your right of habitation is inviolable. And I listened, like you listen to a doctor telling you the tumor is benign, and you cling to that word and don't want to hear the rest. And I signed, because once you start signing you get momentum, like when you accept one bite of tortilla and end up cleaning the dish. And he smiled and shook my hand. And I went to fetch a cookie to offer him how shameful, because to swindlers you offer open doors, not cookies, but good manners are a sentence with no statute of limitations. Months went by, and there was nothing dramatic at first, because small betrayals disguise themselves as normal, and I kept cooking, sweeping, laying the nice tablecloth on Sundays even if I ate alone. And Julian called to see if I needed anything, and I said no, because I learned young not to ask. And one morning in February, he told me he'd organize paperwork with the notary, and that if they called I should give my ID number over the phone, and I did. And now I wonder why I gave my ID over the phone like an ingenuous teenager, and I want to pull my hair out and can't because there's not that much left. And I laugh. Yes, I laugh. Because humor is all I have left to keep from tossing the house out the window. Still, every time he showed up with more folders, I felt that cold current in my stomach, like when you open the fridge and stand there not knowing what you're looking for, and in my head your father's phrase, "The devil's in the fine print." And one night, I haven't told anyone this, I grabbed a flashlight and went up to the attic to check the box where we kept the house purchase papers, the mold-smelling receipts, flyers from the hardware stores, the photo of the freshly painted wall in that cream color everyone used in the 70s. And I searched and touched and rifled through, but didn't find what I wanted. And I came down defeated and promised myself I'd stop suspecting, because suspicion without proof makes you sick too. And so I let myself go, like a plant that survives on the rain that falls when it feels like it, which isn't the same as watering. I go back to Locksmith Tuesday, to this now when my hands shake but my voice doesn't, and I sit at the table, and I call the girl, my granddaughter, and I say, "Come by when you're out of school. Bring that phone of yours that records everything. I want you to help me understand things." And she answers with that clean 20-year-old enthusiasm. "I'm coming, Grandma, I'll make mate. But don't cry, okay?" And I say, "I'm not crying, I never cry, it's just my soul itches." And I hang up and laugh again and decide today I'm not cooking anything that sticks because rage calls a burnt pan. And I open the window so the smell of fear leaves. And I look at myself in the hallway mirror and tell myself, "You're prettier when you're angry." And then I hear a door slam across the street and the neighbor saying, "Poor thing, did you hear?" And I breathe and decide tomorrow I'm going to hear everything too, but properly. Because if I learned anything in this, while it's that the story doesn't start with the locksmith, it starts much earlier, with warm mate and a pen, with a widow who didn't want to be a bother, with a son who already knew how to conjugate adult verbs, protect, optimize, sign, and with a word that repeats in my head like a fool's mantra, never, never, never. And it makes me laugh to think that never was the rope they tied my hands and feet with. And so I grab a sheet and pencil and begin to write what I remember. Dates, names, smells, the tablecloth pattern, the pen brand, because I have this strong feeling in my body that inside those details lives a way out, and I won't let them slam it in my face. Around 5, my granddaughter arrives, comes in with still wet hair and an energy that sweeps the cobwebs from my resentment and hugs me long, the kind of hug that realigns your bones, and says, "Gran, if you want me to record, to investigate, whatever, I'm in. But tell me everything, everything. Because if we're going to fight, let's fight for real." And I tell her about the mate, the paper, the lawyer's cologne, and the word usufruct that now sounds like an insult, and she opens her eyes wide and grabs her notebook and starts taking notes like a journalist, and we make a list, a proper adult list. And I feel a little girl again, finally on the side that asks and not the one that fixes. And between the two of us, we map it out. And suddenly, a little memory comes back, a scene. The tea stain on a paper I set out to dry in the sun because the tablecloth dripped. And I say, there was a stained paper, one they didn't put in the folder. I left it to dry on the kitchen shelf, and the girl jumps up, climbs a chair, checks, and of course it's not there. And we look at each other with that mix of excitement and fear detectives have when they don't yet know if there's a case, and we decide, like picking a party menu, that tomorrow we're going to the lawyer's office, and we're asking for copies of everything, and I'll wear that red jacket that makes me look less tired, and if they talk to me in difficult, I'll answer them in simple, loud, and clear, because I learned language confuses on purpose, and I'm past the age of being confused. But before tomorrow there's night, and Brave Women's Night is long and busy, so I call a neighbor who knows more gossip than the newspaper. And with a naturalness that surprises me, I ask if she's heard anything, if she saw my son leaving with anyone from the office, if she overheard strange conversations, and she, who feels useful, loosens up and tells me she saw him several times with the lawyer, that they'd go into the corner bar and stay hours, that once she heard, "We'll register the property in my name, and then we'll see." And my stomach lurches, and I grab the back of the chair and breathe, and listen, and say, "Thank you," and hang up slowly. And my granddaughter already has the phone in recording mode, because every testimony counts. And I look at her and think that if my son boxed me in with words, I'll defend myself with facts. There'll be a lot of words together, but evidence all the same, and I make peace with the idea that at my age you learn again, even if it hurts. As the afternoon falls, the sun lies down on the facade like always, but to me it feels like a different house, as if the clock your father hung now had a louder tick-tock, as if it were cheering me on, as if every second were a rope holding me up, and I walk down the hallway and run my finger over the picture frames and say their names so I won't forget them. And I promise myself I won't let this story turn me into a bitter old woman, that I'll use humor like a razor and tenderness like a shield. And I laugh to myself and repeat out loud, "Usufruct," to strip it of weight, and it sounds ridiculous, and that eases me. When the girl leaves, I'm alone again. But it's not the same solitude, because now I have a plan on paper and pencil, and I brew a tisane that promises to be good for the heart, and sit at the head of the table, and hear the neighbors dragging chairs on the other side. And I don't care what they say, because tomorrow, when I cross the street to the strong perfume office, I'll go with my head high and clean nails and the list in my pocket, and if they say, "Ma'am, don't get like that," I will get like that. And if they say, "You don't understand," I'll translate my life in one single sentence, long and at once. That I signed for love, that I trusted from exhaustion, that they betrayed me for ambition, and that now, in this body that seemed soft, there's a column of iron I didn't know I had. And though I don't know it yet, though right now I only have memories and rage and a notebook of notes, I sense that in that afternoon of mate and folder, a clue was hidden, a number, an acronym, a crooked stamp, something tiny that slipped past me on the first reading and will now become visible, because the focus women bring when cornered isn't taught in any university, and that makes me laugh and feel proud. And I go to bed late, clothes still on, as if you had to outwatch sleep too, and before I turn off the light, I look at the door and whisper to the doorknob like it's a loyal dog. "Tomorrow they'll find out how many keys you've got," and I smile, because I know I didn't stay still, that I stopped being the widow who signs and became the woman who asks, and maybe, with luck, the one who commands. And I don't know if it happens to you, but I feel that when one tells things straight through, when you say them out loud, you nail them to the world like the sheets in a school notebook, and then they aren't just thoughts that fall apart with sleep. And that's why I told you like this, in one go, so that tomorrow, when I talk to you about the neighborhood and its shutters that drop at the first noise, you'll understand why silence hurts more than shouting, and why that Tuesday wasn't a bolt from the blue, but a storm foretold by a croissant, a caress, a never, and a signature. When you reach a certain age, you start to believe memories file themselves away, as if life had an invisible library that organizes your days by importance. But no. Turns out memories also get jumbled, mixed, stained with guilt. And that Tuesday, after shutting the door and being left alone, the first thing that came crashing back was the day I signed those damned papers. It was a gentle, mild afternoon, the kind where the sun slips through the curtains and you think nothing bad can happen. Julian had come with an elastic-strapped black folder and told me they were bank things that we had to organize Dad's inheritance so there'd be no problems later. I remember perfectly the smell of fresh coffee and the lemon cookies I'd baked. Everything tasted like trust. He talked fast, with that calm tone used by those who know more than you or think they do. "Just sign here, Ma," he said, placing the sheet in front of me, like a model son who only wants to help. And I, who never fully understood paperwork, signed. Because sometimes a signature isn't an act, it's a caress. You trust, and your heart signs before your hand does. I remember that while I wrote my name, he touched my shoulder and said, "This way, if something happens, you're protected." What a word, protected. Sounds tender, doesn't it? Well, wolves use it too when they convince sheep to sleep close to the fire. That night I slept easy. I thought I was doing the right thing, that my son was taking care of me. Because that's what they taught women of my age, that sons are your guarantee of the future, a roof. For old age, the voice that defends you when you've no strength left to shout. And now, so many years later, I realize I didn't sign a paper. I signed a renunciation, stopping believing that anyone would protect me better than I protect myself. The day after that cursed Tuesday, when they tried to throw me out, I sat down to go through the sideboard drawers. I still had the black folder. I opened it with trembling hands, and there was my handwriting, neat, round, naive. Assignment of rights. I read it 3 times. Assignment. What a treacherous word. It sounds elegant, but it means you hand over everything. I remember staring at the signature like it wasn't mine, like some other woman who looked like me had made it one who still believed in other people's goodness. And then a strange blend of sadness and fury hit me. Sadness for being so trusting, and fury for realizing too late. But listen, fury isn't bad. Fury is gasoline when your heart runs out of faith. That afternoon I called Julian. Not to argue, not yet. I called to hear his voice, to confirm whether it still sounded like my son or already like a stranger. "What do you want, Ma?" "I'm working," he said, with that tone kids use when they think they own your time. "Nothing. I just wanted to thank you," I replied, "because you made me realize I'm not old. I'm awake." He didn't get it. He hung up. But I smiled. Because it was true. I was awake. For the first time in years, I could see clearly. That night, I started taking inventory of my life, like a failing business you decide to reopen. Every memory, every decision, every renunciation. And on that mental list, amidst my husband's laughter and family Christmases, there was that day with the black folder. The day I unknowingly started losing my house. There's something nobody tells you. Children can be your greatest pride and your worst mistake, all in the same person. But we don't say that out loud, do we? Well, I've got nothing left to lose. That night, I promised myself that if he could use my signature to erase me, I'd use my memory to get myself back. And yes, maybe an old woman's memory isn't good for much, but it's good for telling the truth. I didn't sleep much. I stayed in the kitchen, radio low, jotting down in a notebook every date, every word I remembered. I didn't know what I was doing it for yet, but I felt that writing was my way of taking back ground, of retracing the map of what was mine. Outside, the wind hit the window, and the dining room clock struck midnight with that stubborn tick-tock. I thought of my husband, how we blindly trusted that love was insurance, a guarantee. And I laughed to myself. Again. How naive. Love guarantees nothing, not a partner's, not children's. It's a variable rate loan, and I just realized they were charging me all the back interest. Before turning off the light, I poured one last mate. I watched it steam on the table and thought not everything was lost. Maybe I had signed everything away, yes, but I still had the most important thing, my voice. And now that they'd tried to take it, I wasn't going to shut it again. That night, while the clock struck 2, I made a decision. If they beat me with papers, I'd fight with memory. At dawn, when the sky began to lighten, the sparrows outside my window surprised me with their song. I hadn't heard them for years. Or maybe I had, but I hadn't wanted to, wrapped in my routines, in the TV noise, or in the silence the dead leave behind. I stayed a while, watching the sun filter through the curtains, and thought days go on even when you feel the world's collapsed. At 8, the bell rang. Twice, quick, insistent. I went slowly, not sure whether it was another attempt to scare me or a nosy neighbor. It was Norma, from across the way, with a bag of warm bread and that expression mixing pity and morbid curiosity, like she'd come to see someone just out of surgery. She came in without asking, because old neighbors' trust doesn't need an invitation, and sat at the table like it was her own house. Ay, Estella, I heard everything she said, opening the bag and filling the air with flour and fake comfort. You don't know how it hurts me what they're doing to you. I looked at her calmly. I've learned people don't come to give you support. They come seeking the relief of not being in your place. I nodded, cut the bread, set the mate, and let her talk. I always knew your son had that odd look, you know, that mix of arrogance and guilt. Just like his father, she went on, without breathing. I didn't answer. No need. People like Norma don't need dialogue, just an audience. By mid-morning, the gossip had spread. From my window, I saw the neighbors walking slower on the sidewalk, the men at the corner shop nodding hello and then lowering their gaze. No one dared ring the bell, but everyone knew. The news had spread like a sour perfume. Old Estella, the one with the rose garden, had been tricked by her son. That afternoon, when I went out to water, I heard 2 women talking on the other side of the wall. They say they'll kick her out any moment. Poor thing. But well, she must have done something, right? The bucket slipped from my hand, and the water spilled among the geraniums. I froze. She must have done something. That phrase pierced me. Because in this country, if you're conned, it's your fault too. If you're betrayed, you should have seen it coming. If they rob you, it's because you trusted too much. That night I didn't turn on the TV. I stayed listening to the neighborhood sounds, that chorus of distant voices, doors closing, motorcycles starting. I thought how all my life I'd lived among these people, sharing snacks, birthdays, gossip, and now they looked at me as if I were a sad item in the paper. The next day, while I swept the sidewalk, she appeared. My granddaughter, Martina. 18 years old, headphones on, backpack on her shoulders, that mix of weariness and defiance kids have when they still think the world belongs to them. She hugged me without saying anything, tight, for real, and for a second I felt air come back into my body. Dad told me what happened, she said, with a voice trembling between indignation and tenderness. Don't worry, Grandma, I won't let them kick you out. I looked at her. She had the same eyes my son had as a child, but without the shadow. I offered to make her coffee, and she sat in front of me, looking around as if recognizing every corner of the house where she'd spent her childhood. I can't believe he's doing this, she murmured. I can't believe it. Neither could I. But he was. And in that moment I understood that, even if the damage was irreversible, I wasn't completely alone. There was an invisible line between us, a silent alliance between women who refused to give in. Martina started coming every Tuesday. She said it was her free day from college, but I knew she came to take care of me. She brought homemade bread, her computer, and spent hours sitting with me, going through papers, looking up lawyers online, teaching me to use the phone to record audio. I pretended not to understand much, but I loved that time. It made me feel useful, alive. The neighborhood got used to seeing her come and go. The women stopped saying hello, maybe because young witnesses make gossip lose its fun. I, on the other hand, felt accompanied. I'd been alone so long I'd forgotten what it was to hear another breath in the house. One afternoon, while she was sorting some documents, she looked at me and said, "Grandma, this can't stay like this. We have to do something." "And what do you want me to do, honey? Kill him with a look?" I answered with that sarcasm that comes out when life gets too serious. She laughed, and her laugh gave me back courage. That night, after she left, I kept thinking about how ties break and rebuild without our deciding. I thought about the people on the block, hiding behind curtains, and that granddaughter who dared to cross the door without fear of what they'd say. I realized not all silences are betrayal. Some are fear, others habit. But hers was different. Her silence was a promise. Sometimes, when the clock strikes 10 and the street noise fades, I like to imagine my house breathing with me. That each wall listens, that the floor remembers my steps and everyone else's who lived here. And I tell myself they won't erase me that easily, that the neighbors can hush, that my son can have all the papers in the world, but the soul of this house is still mine. Martina texts me every Tuesday, even when she doesn't come. She writes, "See you, Gran, meeting day," and I smile to myself. At first it seemed a silly phrase, but now I know it makes sense. Because since this began, Tuesdays became something else. The day I feel like a person again. The day I don't feel invisible. The day someone remembers me without pity. Sometimes I hear her from the corner, with her laughter and her backpack full of ideas, and I think that maybe, unknowingly, that was the real gift of the betrayal, finding an ally. And if I learned anything in this war, it's that you don't need an army to resist. Sometimes a granddaughter and a cup of coffee are enough. Tuesdays started to have a smell. The smell of stew, of onions browning, of hot oil. It was my way of marking territory. If my son thought he could erase my name from a deed, let him try to erase that smell. Because stew, when it sticks a little to the bottom, lingers in the air like a flag. I got up early, opened all the windows, and cooked with a quiet fury, the kind that doesn't shout but burns. And while the steam fogged the windows, I thought up strategies, plans, how to defend myself without seeming crazy. Martina said it was a domestic war. She said it laughing, but she was right. I had decided my trench would be the kitchen. From there, I could hear everything. Neighbors' footsteps, cars stopping, snatches of conversation. And if someone came to intimidate me, let them find a bubbling pot, the scent of bay leaf and meat. Let them understand that in this house, people lived, ate, resisted. One afternoon, while I chopped potatoes, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice on the other side of the door. She didn't ring. She knew I wouldn't open. "Estela, we need to talk," she said, with that forced tone of someone acting for cameras that aren't there. "Talk or lie." I answered without moving, because you learn to spot guilt's costume. "We don't want to hurt you. We just want to resolve this peacefully." "Oh, do you? Why don't you resolve it peacefully with another mother?" "I'm busy." I heard a sigh and the sound of her heels walking away down the hall. I laughed to myself, that laugh that comes when fear turns to courage. The pot kept boiling, and I thought that, for the first time in a long while, I had control. Not of the papers, not of justice, but of my space, my walls, my Tuesdays. That night, Martina brought an idea. She arrived bright-faced, with an enthusiasm that reminded me of myself when I was young. "Gran, we have to make copies of everything, documents, receipts, photos, everything. You never know." And she pulled from her backpack a sky-blue folder full of plastic sleeves and labels. I looked at her and said, "You study law, right? Communications. But today it's all the same. We have to keep a record of everything." I followed her lead. We took every paper out of drawers, the sideboard, the sewing box, even the sugar jar. I was surprised at how much you keep without knowing why. Martina sorted, scanned with her phone, wrote dates and names. Meanwhile, I remembered. And in every paper I found a piece of my life. An 80s power bill, an old letter from my husband, a slip with his signature. Everything seemed to have new importance, as if each paper were a stone in the wall we were building to resist. By 9 at night, the table was full. She looked at me with pride and said, "If they touch you, let them know you're not alone." And I answered with a phrase that slipped out without thinking. "And if they touch me, let them know I'm not the same anymore." The following week, 2 men came. I don't know if my son sent them or some impatient lawyer. They introduced themselves politely, but their eyes were in a hurry. They wanted to verify the condition of the property. I offered tea. They refused. I offered seats. Also refused. So I said, "Well then, I'll stay here in case you need me to sign your soul." They didn't know what to say. They took a stroll, snapped a few photos with a phone, and left. Martina recorded them from the hall without their noticing. When I shut the door, we both burst out laughing. It hit so hard I had to sit down. That laughter gave something back to me. It reminded me, joy is a weapon too. That humor, when used well, disarms the enemy faster than shouting. From that day, I decided that if I had to live through a war, I'd live it with humor. Not the sweet kind. The dry kind. The kind that pricks. Every Tuesday we started a ritual. She brought pastries, I cooked whatever was left in the fridge, and then we reviewed the plan. Sometimes my back neighbor, Marta, came, the one who'd always been a bit nosy but had lately become my accomplice. The 3 of us made lists, drafted questions, read legal articles online we didn't fully understand. One night, as we argued whether it was possible to claim back the deed, Martina looked at me and said, "Grandma, I swear you're braver than many my age." "No, sweetie, I'm not brave, I'm proud." And at my age, that's almost the same thing. I kept thinking about that after they left. The silence returned to the house, but it no longer weighed. It had the echo of voices, of laughter, of movement. And then I knew. This house, which for years had been just a space, was now my battlefield and my refuge. That dawn I dreamed of my husband. He was in the kitchen, sitting in his chair, looking at me without speaking. He wasn't smiling or angry. He just looked, with those eyes that always seemed to know more than they said. I woke with the feeling he'd given me his blessing or his forgiveness or both. When I got up, the house smelled of old food, of a lived-in home. I poured a mate and looked in the mirror. My eyes seemed clearer, more awake. I don't know if it was the morning light or if it was me, but I looked different, as if something in me had shifted back into place. That day, without telling Martina, I went to the hardware store and bought a new lock. I changed it myself, with my husband's screwdriver, and when I finished, I felt a satisfaction you can't explain. It wasn't just security, it was a statement. This door now opens and closes with my hands, and no one else has the key. The day I invited him for tea was one of those days when the air feels stalled, heavy, as if the world were waiting for someone to do something crazy. I'd already done it, actually, deciding I'd look my son in the eye and make him lie to my face. Not to reconcile, not to cry, not to understand him. Just to listen, record his voice, and let the truth incriminate itself. I set it all up like a ceremony. Embroidered cloth, my mother's porcelain cups, sugar cubes, the scent of black tea filling the kitchen. Sometimes revenge needs fine china too. Martina helped me prepare the phone. She showed me how to leave it recording without being noticed, hid it behind the vase, and kissed my forehead before leaving. "Be careful, Gran, don't get carried away," she said. I pretended calm, but my heart was clenched, beating like it knew the day would mark something important. Julian arrived on time, which already was suspicious. He carried a folder, the same as always, and a forced smile. That smile bothered me more than any insult. He sat across from me and accepted tea as if nothing had happened. He looked around, avoiding me, and I watched him with a mix of anger and tenderness, because even though it hurt, I still saw the little boy who once asked permission to go play. "What do you want, Ma?" he asked, impatient. "Nothing, son. To chat. We haven't talked in weeks. It does me good to see you." He set the cup on the saucer with a sharp clink. "Let's not start. You know how things are. The papers are in process. You can't keep resisting." Resisting? I didn't know defending my home was resisting. I thought it was living. He shifted in his chair, uneasy. I stared without blinking. "Tell me something, Julian," I said, and my voice trembled a little, not from fear, but from restraint. "When you processed that paperwork, what were you thinking? That I'd never notice? That I'd die peacefully, and you'd keep everything without telling me?" He let out a long sigh, looked at his watch, and answered with that condescending, weary tone that churned my stomach. "Ma, it wasn't like that. It was for you. To protect you from taxes, from headaches. I already explained. If the house was in my name, it was easier to manage everything." "Oh, really?" I said, leaning in slightly, as if sharing a secret. "Then say it again. Tell me again, you did it for me." He hesitated a second and then repeated it. "I did it for you." He said it twice more, not noticing that each word was being saved in that little device hidden among the flowers. I watched him sip tea with the calm of someone no longer waiting for apologies. I didn't want to convince him or make him feel guilty. I just needed his voice, his lie wrapped in good manners. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door. "Julian," I said before he went out, "do you know the worst thing about growing old? Being treated like you're dumb. And I'm not dumb." He didn't answer. He looked at me for a second, as if searching for something that wasn't there anymore. Perhaps the docile mother who'd been dying on him bit by bit. He lowered his eyes and left. I shut the door and stood still, listening to his steps fade down the hall. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. My hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from satisfaction. I knew I had something powerful, even if I didn't yet know exactly how to use it. The house was silent, the kind of silence heavier than noise. I went to the kitchen, took the phone out of the vase, and pressed play. His voice came out clear, firm, cold. "It was for you. It was for you." The phrase, repeated, raised goosebumps. He hadn't shouted, insulted, or threatened. He'd just spoken his truth, and his truth condemned him. Martina came later. I played her the recording, and her eyes lit up. "Grandma, this is gold. This is evidence." "Evidence of what, honey?" "That love and betrayal sound the same." She stayed quiet, hugged me, and didn't push it. That night, we ate reheated stew, the usual one, but it tasted different. I don't know if it was pride or rage, but it tasted good. After, while she stacked cups in the sink, I sat at the table and watched her. She had that same focused look her father had when he studied. It hurt to think blood carries both the good and the bad, that the same hands that once caressed can also erase. When Martina left, I replayed the recording several times. Not to make sure you could hear it, but to recognize his tone. I looked for a crack, a tremor, something to tell me there was still a bit of the child I raised, but I didn't find it. It was an adult voice, sure, almost professional, telling a lie as if it were an act of love. I stayed up late, cold mate by my side, thinking how things flip without you noticing. How a whole life can be summed up in a conversation where the son says, "It was for you," and the mother learns that misguided affection can be a weapon too. That night I dreamed my house had talking walls, that each brick repeated those words on loop like an endless echo. I woke sweating, with the sense that something had shifted inside me, a new fatigue, an old certainty. I couldn't keep waiting. I couldn't stay behind the door, smelling of stew and fear. At daybreak, I put water on to heat and wrote a list on a page torn from Martina's notebook. Call lawyer, review papers, request copy of the title, look for the bank letter. Every word was a step, a small brick more in my rebuilding. And as I wrote, his voice kept ringing in my head like a bell that won't let you sleep. "It was for you. It was for you." I poured fresh tea, drank it slowly, and thought maybe he was right after all. Maybe it was for me. But not the way he thought. Because thanks to his betrayal, I was finally awake. I got the lawyer's number on one of those mornings when time seems stopped, when the air smells like dust and decisions. He was the kind you know by sight, from the neighborhood. Always walked past my house in a suit, even on Sundays, greeting everyone with that smile of important men. Dr. Cifuentes, they said. He'd been my husband's friend, and at one point even helped us with some insurance paperwork. It took effort to dial, not from fear, but from distrust. At that point, I understood friendly people keep clean hands because someone else does the dirty work. When he picked up, his voice was oily, soft, the kind that slides off leaving no trace. I told him I needed advice, without saying what about. He gave me an appointment for Thursday at 10. I was on time, with my folder and my notebook full of notes, like a student who doesn't plan to be fooled again. The office smelled of strong cologne and old paper. Diplomas on the wall, photos at dinners with politicians, a flag in a corner, everything, too tidy, too clean, he offered. Coffee, and I accepted, because poison in a cup doesn't show. How can I help you, Estella? He said, barely looking up. I'm here because I need to recover what's mine, I replied. And what's that exactly? My house, or what's left of it on paper. He lifted his gaze. His face tightened a fraction of a second, but I caught it. He knew at once what I meant. He knew, and that was enough to confirm he was in it up to his neck. Ah, yes, he said slowly. The issue with your son, right? I remember. What do you mean you remember? Well, yes. I drafted the documents at the time, of course, to sort out the succession. He said it casually, like he was talking about the weather. I stared without blinking, and felt that quiet fury that doesn't express itself by shouting, but by a calm that frightens. So you did the papers, I said slowly, savoring each word. How curious, because no one explained anything to me. Well, Estella, you signed them, didn't you? He replied, leaning forward. If you signed, it's because you understood. No, doctor, I signed because I trusted. Not the same thing. The silence that followed was thick. The ceiling fan turned slowly, and the man's perfume churned my stomach. He talked about legal processes, right intentions, communication errors, all wrapped in that language used by those who think words can cover up dirt. I let him speak, without interrupting. When he finished, I set my hands on the folder and looked straight at him. Tell me something, Cifuentes. If it were your mother who signed those papers, would you also tell her to suck it up for trusting? His face changed. That sneer of superiority twisted a little, as if something real had finally hit him. He stammered, grabbed another sheet, pretended to review a file that didn't exist. Then, in a lower voice, he said, Look, Estella, between us. If there's still a copy of the original title, you might have a chance. But if you don't have it, it's hard. And where would that copy be? If your husband was orderly, surely in his possession, or in some old archive. But if your son found it first, forget it. I kept quiet. I thanked him without smiling. Before I left, I stood in the doorway and said, Oh, and doctor, the cologne is too strong. Smells like it's trying to cover guilt. I left with my heart pounding. I didn't know whether I'd won or lost anything, but I'd gotten back something more valuable. Instinct. That certainty that you can trust again, just not the same people. I walked slowly home, the sun on my face, the traffic noise mixing with my thoughts. I had a lead, a copy, an old paper, proof the house had once been mine. Martina was waiting, sitting on the curb with a mate in hand. She saw me coming and knew something had changed. What did he say? She asked. That we should look for a copy, that if it turns up, everything can turn around. And do you believe him? No, but we'll look anyway. That night we searched again. Every drawer, every folder, every yellowed envelope full of the year's dust. We found bank papers, letters, receipts, even the program from my wedding. But nothing of the original title. Fatigue beat me and I slumped in the chair. Martina looked at me with a mix of tenderness and frustration. Grandma, don't give up, she said. I'm not giving up, sweetie. I'm resting. Wars need breaks too. I sat in silence, looking at the dining room lamp, listening to the electric hum that seemed to set my breathing's rhythm. I don't know how long passed before I heard her voice again. Gran, what if it's not here? What if the copy is somewhere else? Then I remembered. The attic, that corner no one had climbed up to in years. The place where my husband kept everything that might come in handy someday. I shivered. I'd avoided it for a long time because it still smelled like him, like wood and tobacco. But something in me lit up, a stubborn old intuition. We'll go up tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow? She asked, surprised. Yes, tomorrow is Tuesday. Tuesdays are for fighting. We both laughed. And while I closed the windows before bed, I kept thinking of the lawyer, his cologne, his gaze that dodged mine. I knew he'd told me the truth without meaning to, and that's the best kind of truth, the one that slips from liars. That night I slept little, but with the feeling that something was about to be revealed. As if the house, tired of so much silence, were about to speak. Next morning I got up before the sun, with that mix of anxiety and determination that wakes you before the clock. I made a strong coffee, double the usual, and lingered at the window looking out to the patio, as if waiting for a sign from the sky that I was doing the right thing. The house was quiet, still wrapped in dawn's dimness, and I had the feeling it was watching me. Sometimes I think houses feel they know when you're about to touch them in their deepest places. Martina arrived at daybreak, hair messy, a flashlight hanging from her neck, and a face ready for adventure. "We'll find it today, Gran," she said, and hugged me. I laughed, but felt a chill. Climbing into the attic was like opening a tomb of my memories, of everything I'd left unchecked for decades. Each step of the ladder creaked, dust floated in the air like smoke, and the smell of old wood hit me full on. We switched on the flashlight, and the beams cut the darkness like knives. There were the stacked boxes, the old suitcases, jars of screws and rusty tins my husband never threw away. Everything had a layer of dust so thick it looked like snow. "What a mess," Martina said, laughing and sneezing. "Not a mess," I answered. "History." Though I knew it was also clutter, a lifetime's clutter kept for fear of forgetting. We started checking box by box. Yellowed photos, gas receipts. From 80, unopened letters, tools, broken toys, the scarf my mother knitted before she died. Each object jabbed a memory. Martina read aloud the papers she found, and every word seemed to echo inside me. "Gran, look at this," she said suddenly, lifting a brown, string-tied folder. I recognized it at once. It was my husband's handwriting, neat, as if every stroke were a promise. I opened it carefully, so as not to tear anything, and there it was, the original title, in my name. The letters worn, but legible, the signature intact. I don't know if it was relief or fury, but my sight blurred. The air left me, and I had to sit on a box. Martina hugged me, and I stayed a while, unable to speak. It was like getting back a part of my body that had been amputated without anesthesia. I held it in my hands, breath hitching, and for a moment everything went silent. When I found my voice, I managed to say, "I told you. He kept everything, even hope." We kept going through the folder, and there was a letter, folded and clipped, addressed to me. The ink on the envelope had run with damp, but the name was clear. "For Estella, if you ever need it." My heart jumped. Martina looked at me, waiting. "Shall we open it?" she asked, as if needing permission. I nodded, and with trembling hands I took out the sheet. It was my husband's writing. I knew that firm hand, that way of writing with the certainty of someone who doesn't doubt even when he's wrong. I began to read. "Estella, if you're reading this, something went wrong. Don't trust anyone but yourself. I did everything I could to leave you safe, but I don't know if I managed it. If Julian gets in the middle, look for the copy I kept with my things. You know where. I'm sorry if I failed you. It wasn't my intention. I didn't know how to do it better." Tears blurred my vision, not tears of sadness, but of confirmation. All the distrust, all the intuition I'd felt over the years was there, in those short, lines, written by the man I'd loved all my life and who, without wanting to, left me the problem I now had to solve. Martina stayed quiet, eyes wide, unsure whether to comfort me or scream. I breathed deep, put the letter with the title, and closed the folder. "Now what?" she asked. "Now," I said, "now part 2 begins." We came down from the attic slowly, as if carrying a relic. I laid the folder on the dining table, stared at it a long while, and felt my house recognize me again, as if it whispered, "There you are, Estella, you're back." I brewed mate and passed it to Martina. She drank in silence. I couldn't stop looking at the paper. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" she said. "Everything," I answered. "Now I have what they never thought I would: proof and time." That afternoon I took out an old wooden box I kept in the closet and put in the folder, the letter, and the phone with the recording. I locked the box and hid it under the dining room cabinet in the niche where I used to stash grocery money. I didn't want any of it to leave the house. It was my arsenal. As the afternoon fell and light came in golden through the windows, I felt a calm I hadn't known in months. The calm of someone who knows she holds the truth in her hands, even if the world doesn't know it yet. Martina looked at me with a mix of admiration and pride. I realized that in those young eyes, something I'd forgotten was reflected. Dignity is inherited too. That night, I went to bed with the letter under my pillow. Not to cry, but to remind myself that even after the dead, truth finds a way. Before sleep, I spoke to the silence as if my husband could hear. "It's okay, old man. This time, you won't leave me to do it alone." And I slept with the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't fighting the wind anymore. The next Tuesday dawned with a gray sky that looked like an omen, but omens don't scare me. The years taught me bad weather is like fake people. It passes, but leaves mud. I ate breakfast slowly, the title on the table, like a trophy. I hadn't put it away that night. I left it there on purpose, to see it when I woke, to make sure it hadn't been a dream. When Martina arrived, the envelope's roughness was still printed on my hands, the feel of papers that weigh more than they look. She came full of an energy that almost made me envious, talking about laws, how to file a complaint, that we needed an honest lawyer. She said it with a tone that made me smile, and that with the evidence we had, things would change. I listened, even though inside I felt a strange calm, as if fear had melted. It was the same calm I felt when I gave birth, that instant between pain and relief, when you know there's no going back. We decided to start with the basics, make copies of the title and the letter. We went to a copy shop downtown, one of those that still smell like ink and cigarettes, and the man behind the counter, an old one with a mustache, looked at me curiously when he saw the document. He didn't ask questions, but when he handed me the copies, he said in a low voice, "Take care of that, ma'am. Some things are worth more than a house." And I didn't know if he meant the paper or my dignity, but I nodded anyway. That afternoon, on the way back, I felt for the first time that I walked differently. No longer hunched or fearful, but upright, with the slow, steady step of someone who's come back to inhabit her own body. When I entered the house, I breathed deep, and the air tasted like home again. Martina put the copies in a neat blue folder and stayed until late, organizing everything. I told her I planned to speak to Cifuentes again, not to ask for help, but so he'd know I had weapons too. Next day, I called the office and asked to see him. When I stepped in, he didn't last 2 minutes before getting nervous. He offered coffee, again, and I declined. I put the title copy on his desk and watched him pale. "Well, look at that, doctor," I said, with a calm that knocked him off balance. "Seems the order you love wasn't so perfect. Estella, I don't understand how—" "No need for you to understand. It's enough if you keep quiet." He didn't reply. He lowered his eyes and fidgeted with his pen. I turned around and left. That afternoon, I felt light, almost young. The following days were a mix of moves and veiled threats. My son started calling more often, first conciliatory, then irritated. He told me I was badly advised, that this way we wouldn't get anywhere, that family matters get handled at home. I let him talk, and answered the minimum. My voice didn't shake anymore. Martina recorded every call and stored the audio on her computer. The fear I'd felt turned into a serene kind of adrenaline, an energy that held me up. One Tuesday, without warning, he showed up at the door. Not alone. He'd brought the locksmith again, the same one as the first time, but this time the man wouldn't even look at me. "Ma, this can't go on," Julian said, arms crossed, trying to sound reasonable. "Sign, I'll get you a comfortable apartment near me. You can't keep living like this, alone, in this old house." I looked at him for a long time, without blinking. This old house watched me raise your kids, watched me say goodbye to your father, watched me cook when you were starving. You haven't watched me die yet. So, for now, stay outside. The locksmith looked at me with a mix of respect and shame and set his tool bag down. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said quietly. "I won't touch a thing here." Julian turned around and left without saying goodbye. I closed the door and stood, breathing slowly. My legs felt firm, blood running, my heart like a drum. It was my house, and I was still there. From then on, every Tuesday became a ritual of resistance. Martina and Marta, the neighbor from the back, would come, and sometimes another woman from the block, brave enough to cross the line of "what will people say?" We cooked something, chatted, reviewed the case's progress, and laughed a while too. I told them we were a revolutionary committee, though the only explosions we set off were of laughter. But deep down, we knew that too is a way to fight. One night, while we ate, the three of us, there was a thud at the door. A stone wrapped in paper. Martina picked it up off the floor and read the note aloud. "Stop meddling in what's not your business." No signature. We looked at each other and, instead of being scared, laughed. Because if they'd resorted to throwing stones, it meant we were doing something right. That same night, after they left, I sat in the kitchen and poured myself a wine. The clock showed 11, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not the peace of someone who has won, but of someone who knows she has nothing left to lose. Outside, the rain began to fall gently on the roof, and I thought even the sky was washing the house clean of so much poison. I dozed off in the chair, half-finished glass in hand, and dreamed Tuesdays stretched into Thursday, that time elongated so I could stay there forever, at my table, with my papers, my granddaughter, my allies, and that freshly recovered dignity that no longer fit inside my chest. When I woke, it was still raining, and I knew without needing to see the calendar that it was Tuesday again. And that Tuesdays, from then on, would never be ordinary. They'd be days of fire. Court day dawned with an insolent sun, one of those mornings that don't know how to show respect for other people's pain. I woke before the alarm, stomach in knots and head full of phrases I wasn't going to say, because I've learned in those places the truth doesn't always win by word count, but by how you drop it. I dressed slowly, in the gray suit I'd kept for special occasions, and, while I buttoned my blouse, I realized this was the occasion, not to celebrate, but to defend what was still left of me. Martina insisted on coming. She arrived early, with an oversized bag full of folders, flash drives, and that determined look of those who believe in justice. When I saw her come in, hair tied back, and that decisive stride, I felt a mix of tenderness and pride. I, meanwhile, moved slower, as if every step were a negotiation with my bones and my past. We walked to the courthouse hardly talking, and when we got there, the building felt like a sleeping beast. Gray, enormous, full of soulless doors opening and shutting. Inside, the air was dense. Everything smelled of damp, paper, and distrust. In the room were already Julian and his lawyer, the same one who'd lied to me with expensive perfume and measured words. They didn't look at me. No need. I looked at them, without hate, but with the calm of someone who's shed fear. I sat in the front row, set my purse on my lap, and waited. The judge was a young man, looking like he hadn't lived enough to fully understand what happens when a son betrays his mother. But he looked at me with respect, and that was enough. The hearing began. Words flew from side to side, cold, legal, packed with technicalities seemingly designed so the truth would get lost among them. Julian spoke with confidence, saying everything had been done out of love and protection. And every time I heard him repeat those words, my blood boiled. When my turn came, I stood. The room fell silent. "Ma'am, you may speak," the judge said. And I spoke. Not as a victim, nor as a confused old woman. I spoke as a woman tired of being run over. I told how they'd made me sign without explaining, how they'd tried to erase me from my home, how they'd changed the name on the door, and how, even so, I was still there. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't give a speech. I simply told the truth plain, direct, unadorned. At one point, when I mentioned the recording and showed the copy of the title, I heard a murmur. My son's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, and the judge asked for order. "I have evidence, Your Honor," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Not just papers. I have memory, and that weighs more than any stamp." Martina stood and presented the documents, the copies, my husband's letter, all neatly ordered. She spoke with a confidence that moved me. I saw the judge watching her, attentive, and I knew something was tilting in our favor. My son lowered his eyes. For a second, very brief, I thought he might say something, but he didn't. The hearing lasted hours, though to me it felt like a single held breath. When the judge finally called a recess, I felt my legs failing. We stepped into the hallway. Martina hugged me and whispered, "Win or not, Gran, you already did it." And she was right. I had already done it. I had said out loud what others prefer to keep quiet. I had named the abuse disguised as affection. When they called us back, the judge spoke slowly, reading each word like it had weight. He said that, according to the evidence, the transfer of property had been done without my full consent, that the original documentation proved title in my name, and therefore my right to the home was reinstated. I heard it, but didn't fully grasp it until Martina squeezed my hand and breathed, "You won, Grandma." I didn't cry. I couldn't. It was a strange mix of relief and emptiness, like when you drop something you've carried too long. I looked at my son, still not raising his head. For a second I thought of going over, touching his arm, telling him there was still time to mend something. But then I remembered every Tuesday, every word, every betrayal, and understood no, that time had passed. When we stepped outside, the sun was still there, just as insolent, but now I liked it. The light hit my face, and for the first time in months, I felt warmth. We walked slowly, Martina at my side, talking non-stop, full of plans. I let her talk and looked at her with immense tenderness. I thought she was the real inheritance worth keeping. That night, when I came home, I opened all the windows and let the air in, let the neighborhood sounds fill the silence. People watched from sidewalks. Some waved, others looked away. I didn't care. I poured a glass of wine, the same one I'd left half full, and toasted alone, not for the victory, but for having resisted, for keeping my voice when everyone expected me to fall silent. I turned on the radio, put on an old tango, and stared at the dining room clock. The hands pointed to 10 at night, and I smiled. It was Tuesday. Tuesday again. I promised myself that, from now on, all my Tuesdays would be mine, even if there was no one left to tell them to. Because justice, when it comes, doesn't sound like a fanfare. It sounds like a soft click of a lock, the one you changed with your own hands. The following weeks slid by slowly, as if time realized it owed me something and wanted to pay it back with interest. The house went back to breathing, and so did I. At first it was hard to sleep, conditioned by sudden noises, phone calls, the idea someone might pound at the door, demanding what was no longer theirs. But gradually the silence became friendly, full of small sounds, the wood creaking, the kettle's whistle, sparrows murmuring in the patio. Things that once passed me by now felt like a form of thanks. Martina kept coming, though now not out of need but for pleasure. She spent long afternoons with me, studying, talking about her things, telling me how she had to present on property rights at college, and she used my story without names. But with everything that matters, she clarified. And I laughed because I thought there was no need. Everyone already knew who I was. On the block, looks changed. Some crossed the street to greet me with that clumsy respect, reserved for survivors. Others lowered their heads, perhaps because shame weighs more than guilt. I responded with a brief smile and kept walking. I wasn't interested in apologies or applause. I wanted to live in peace, without having to justify every step. One afternoon, I felt like painting the front gate. I hadn't touched it in years, and the old paint flaked off like the skin of something that needed to be reborn. I bought the dark green enamel. I've always liked the same color we chose when we bought the house. I climbed a little stool and started painting, the sun slanting and the radio low. My muscles protested, but my body woke up too. Each brushstroke was a way to mark territory, to make it clear this place was still mine, not only by law, but by history, by habit, by love. Martina took a photo from the sidewalk and said, laughing, that it looked like a movie scene. Maybe it was. A movie where the lead no longer waits for rescue or fears the ending because she knows she already wrote it with her own hands. I told her I planned to plant jasmine in the patio to perfume summer nights. She helped dig holes, set roots, cover them with damp soil. When we finished, we sat a while in silence, looking at the small flowers like promises. I heard little from Julian. A brief call, dry, formal. He asked how I was. I said fine, and we both pretended to believe it. I hold no grudge, but I don't forget. Forgiveness isn't always a hug. Sometimes it's just stopping, expecting the other to understand, and I expect nothing now. I look at him from the distance of blood, a strange distance. It binds and separates at the same time. Some nights, when the house is still and the clock strikes 11, I like talking to my husband in a low voice. I tell him how things are, that I found his letter, that I keep it in the wooden box, along with the recording and the original title. Sometimes I think I feel his presence, not as a sad ghost, but as a warm air slipping through the curtains. I don't know if he hears me, but I speak anyway, because some conversations you keep having, even when the other no longer answers. One rainy afternoon, while putting away some cups, I realized I wasn't thinking about fear anymore. I'd stopped dwelling on the past, the trial, the betrayals, all that had become history, and I, without noticing, had become its narrator. The house, with its cracks, noises, and shadows, was now my stage and my refuge. No longer the place of the wound, but of the scar. I started writing in a notebook, not a diary, something freer, messier. Loose words, memories, thoughts, scraps of phrases that occur to me while I sweep or cook. Martina says I should publish it, that many women would see themselves in it, but I don't do it for that. I do it because writing makes me feel I keep leaving tracks, that I'm not erasing myself. A few days ago, Marta, the back neighbor, came with a ricotta pie and an awkward hug. She told me her son called after years of silence and that, without knowing why, she thought of me. "You gave me courage, Estella," she said, and I almost cried. Maybe that's the most discreet form of justice, when a story serves as a mirror, not a lesson. Tonight I sit on the porch with Mate by my side, watching the wind stir the jasmine and listening to the radio. The sky is clear and the stars look like pinholes in a black curtain. I think I spent a lifetime believing Tuesdays were unimportant, those middle days you don't remember, and yet it was a Tuesday when everything began. A Tuesday when they betrayed me, a Tuesday when I chose to resist, a Tuesday when I found the evidence, a Tuesday when I won in court, so Tuesdays are mine now. They remind me that even in your 70s you can start again, that your voice doesn't age if you use it to defend yourself, that dignity, though they try to take it, always finds a crack to grow back through. I switch off the light, leave the door ajar, and before going in, I give the house one last look. It's the same as always, but different. I no longer look at it, afraid to lose it, but with the pride of having won it back. And I think, with that tired but alive smile that comes naturally, I didn't win a house, I won time, and that, at my age, is a miracle. And that's where my story ends. Or at least this part, because life always finds a way to surprise us when we think we've seen it all. If you made it this far, thank you for listening, for keeping me company every Tuesday, for staying till the end. Before we close, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what this story made you feel. Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want to keep sharing more stories like this with me, don't forget to subscribe. We'll meet in the next chapter.